Hi, I'm Robert Klein.
And I'm Lisa Klein, and we are the co-chairs for Partnership Together in Louisville. We were introduced to partnership in 2013 when John and Laura Klein, our co-chair predecessors, invited us on a mission to Israel in our partnership region. We had a spectacular time there, touring the partnership region and meeting a lot of friends with whom we still stay in contact. Since our experience in 2013, we became the chairs a year or two later, and we have hosted numerous delegations here in Louisville, including but not limited to the Women Creating a Dialogue delegation, Teachers delegation, Artists delegation, Chefs delegation, and most recently the distiller, Yuval. And we have maintained contact with them and have really enjoyed getting to know people throughout the U.S. in our other partnership cities, and our friends from Budapest, and going to Israel again in that time. It has really been a privilege, and we hope you enjoy this presentation.
So, welcome to the Ville. I will give you a tour of our fine city.
The falls of the Ohio River meant that goods could not travel to the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico without portage. Thus, a settlement arose that became Louisville, formally established in 1778 by George Rogers Clark, the Clark of Lewis and Clark expedition that began here. Kentucky was part of Virginia and split off in 1792 when Thomas Jefferson was governor. Louisville was the name chosen to honor King Louis XVI for France's aid in the Revolutionary War. Louisville is located on the Mason-Dixon line, 100 miles west of Cincinnati, 110 miles south of Indianapolis, and 180 miles north of Nashville. So, Louisville is part Southern and part Midwestern. Kentucky was officially neutral during the Civil War, but Louisville was a Union supply base, hospital center, and quartering grounds for Union troops.
So I hear you have Café Anglais, and that you're working on conversational English. So I thought I'd give you some of the lessons I've learned having been here 30 years. When I first got here, Mayor Jerry Abramson sat me down. We were stuck at a dinner, I don't remember what it was for, sitting next to each other, and he spent 15 minutes teaching me to say Louisville, which is not an easy thing to say because it's not spelled like that. So this is not Louisville, and it's definitely not Louisville unless you're just trying to, like make nice with the locals. But it's two syllables, Louisville. You have to kind of swallow it together. So if you have friends in Louisville, say hi. Also, Louisvillians have this unique Southern standard because we're right on the Mason-Dixon line, kind of technically south, but not really south, that we don't say y'all like you do in southern cities. And you don't say you or use guys like you would in New York, but it's you all. Both words have to be pronounced. So I hope you all have a wonderful year coming up, and these are your two lessons on Louisville English.
Of course, the most famous Louisvillian of all is the Louisville Lip, Muhammad Ali. Come visit his center. Some other famous Louisvillians include Jennifer Lawrence and Diane Sawyer. And then there's our world-famous bourbon, a major tourist attraction for the Louisville area, home of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. We hosted a partnership event around bourbon and visited some of the tourist attractions in the Louisville area around bourbon, including the tourist center in Bardstown, Kentucky, you see here. Yes, and there's Kentucky Fried Chicken, headquartered here in Louisville. Humana is headquartered here. General Electric appliances, where your dishwasher and washing machines are made. Ford Motor Company has two major plants here, including the ones that make all the Super Duty trucks and the Ford Escape. The UPS Worldport is here. And of course, Louisville Slugger baths are manufactured here in Louisville. That's the world's largest bat you're seeing there. And Louisville Slugger Field that hosts the AAA Louisville Bats baseball team. The University of Louisville is a major employer and large influence in the medical, legal, professional, scientific, and other academic fields. There is Cardinal Stadium, the KFC Yum Center in downtown that hosts the University of Louisville Cardinal men's and women's basketball teams.
And now the most exciting horse race in the world. The 145th Kentucky Derby. They're in the gate. And they're off in the Kentucky Derby.
Louisville is home to Churchill Downs and the Kentucky Derby and Museum you'll have to visit. The race is preceded by a 2-week festival that includes Thunder over Louisville, the largest fireworks display in North America. Louisville has also hosted the Ryder Cup and the PGA Championship several times.
A recycled rail bridge over the Ohio River is now a popular walking and biking bridge at our waterfront park. The historic sternwheeler Belle of Louisville plies the river. Ours is a city of parks, the original system designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park in New York City. We have some fine museums, too.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Joe Rooks-Rapport. I'm senior rabbi of the temple, which is where we're sitting right now in Ann's Garden outside the front of our congregation. I'm not from Louisville. You have to start off every conversation with, I've only lived here for 30-some years, but that doesn't count. You can go to high school here. History in Louisville is a function of having grown up together. Many of the members of our congregation, remember their preschool friends. It's a very tight-knit community that has a long, long history that goes back over 180 years, and then some. That was part of my interest in coming here, honestly. I'm an historian, and Temple being one of the founding congregations of the Reform movement and sort of the history of Jewish Louisville was a real draw for me to come here. Well, some of the most famous would be Justice Brandeis, first Jewish Supreme Court Justice of the United States, who we have a abiding love and interest for. His yahrzeit, the anniversary of his passing, is my daughter's birthday, which has always been kind of an interesting cycle since she was a Brandeis University graduate. And obviously we have, I don't know if it's obvious to people in partnership, but the Brandeis School of Law is based here at the University of Louisville too. So there's a real cult of Brandeis with posters of him downtown, historical markers on his boyhood home, which still stands down on Broadway. The Brandeis clan, which included the Dembitzes and the Wheels, came here in the 1840s from Madison, Indiana, and before that Cincinnati, but originally back from Austria. And they were very involved in politics, abolitionists, and early members of the Republican Party. Brandeis's uncle, Louis Dembitz, nominated Abraham Lincoln for the presidency in 1860 at the Chicago Convention. So there's a lot of pride in that history, but also sort of connection to that ongoing legacy of justice, in the broad sense of the term here. The first baseball team in Louisville was founded by a Jewish man who came here for bourbon, Isaac Bernheim, who you could argue, if you define the terms carefully, invented bourbon. Bourbon had been around before that, but it was only something that was like in Bourbon County and Shelbyville and Bardstown in that area, and going downriver to New Orleans. Those are the only people who drank bourbon before Isaac Bernheim. Isaac Bernheim moved his distilleries from Bardstown up to Louisville, where the Falls of the Ohio were, and he was the first person to nationally distribute and standardize bourbon standards, making it a drink that was popular outside of this immediate region. He was a great philanthropist, one of the founding members of the board of Hebrew Union College, and helped finance their first library, which has grown and developed to the point where today it's the largest Jewish library anywhere outside of the land of Israel. And a huge philanthropist here in Louisville. Many of the statues of famous figures in the Capitol and throughout Louisville, Jefferson, Lincoln, many of his heroes, he had statues built all over the community. And obviously the most significant is Bernheim Forest, a gift to the Commonwealth of 15,000 acres of a private park that's been restored into this wonderful beauty. And from its very beginnings, almost 100 years ago, its mission was to be, a park for an opportunity for nature for people of all races, creeds, colors. He was a real, social reformer in that regard too. Way back, many famous rabbis, Adolph Moses, who was he was a rabbi in the time of Bernheim, about 100 years ago, who was one of the founding rabbis of the Reform movement. Temple, when Reform Judaism was founded, was the second largest Reform congregation in America. Under Rabbi Moses' direction, a lot of the early, establishment of the early concepts of Reform Judaism, services on Friday night, the equality of women, the use of music and liturgical reform. These were all sort of foundational values.
Shalom, y'all. This is Sarah Wagner here in Louisville, Kentucky. Thrilled to be talking to all of my friends in the partnership. I am the president and CEO of the Jewish Community of Louisville, which is our JCC and our federation. And I'm incredibly fortunate to be letting you in on a little secret that's happening in our backyard right now here on the JCC campus. So the JCC is in front of me. You can't see it, but this wonderful pile of earth that's being moved back here right behind me is the future home of our brand new JCC. We're incredibly proud that our JCC was one of the first 7 JCCs founded in North America back in the 1800s. We can't wait to get in our new building. We love our beloved building that has served us for 65 years, but we are ready to start fresh and new in a new home where we will welcome all of Jewish Louisville and hopefully each and every one of you when you come visit us here in the Ville. Our partnership with the Western Galilee is essential to everything we do in Louisville. We are proud to have been one of the first communities in the consortium to join together back in over 20 years ago now. And we've made so many friendships, so many opportunities to travel back and forth. And we can't wait until we can get to the airport again and come see you, and likewise that you can get to Ben Gurion and join us here in Louisville.
Louisville is like the biggest little city you've ever encountered. It's fascinating. I mean, it's depending on how you count things, we're what, the 15th largest city in America, depending on where you draw the lines of what's Louisville. It's a big city in that regard. There's more than 1 million people who live here, but it has a real small town kind of a feel. I don't know if that's the Southern charm and the Derby influence, but there's a real concern for one another, and the kind of common courtesy, and the Jewish community in particular is really tightly knit. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business, and that's somehow a wonderful thing, because we all kind of look out for each other and take care of each other and care about what's going on in this tiny community where, despite numbers of 8,000-9,000 people, we've got 5 congregations and Jewish institutions, a wonderful and growing Jewish community center, and Jewish family and career services, and and there's just not enough of us for that to be real. But somehow we just keep changing hats and running around and making sure that all happens. So I love being in Louisville. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Take me back to Louisville. Take me 'neath that southern sky. Wanna see Louisville, Louisville, KY.
Hi, everyone. Going to take just a minute here before we get started. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to sign into the meeting. Come over from Facebook. So again, I'm just going to wait a moment until everybody can get onto this Zoom call, and then we'll get started with our discussion here very shortly.
Hey, Bracha.
Hi.
Bracha / Beth.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Well,
hi, everyone. Thank you for the video and for this great morning. Terrific. Glad to be here with everybody. Hi, Israel.
Hi.
it's so good to see everybody. I miss all of you.
Hello.
Hey, Robert, Lisa.
Hello.
Hey,
Great to see
Tanya.
everybody.
Nice shirt,
Bill,
Robert.
Al,
Hi,
Jay, Bracha, Sharon, Lacey,
Hi,
everybody.
Talia.
Oh,
Hey, Heidi.
It was great, Robert and Lisa.
yeah,
great.
really.
Great job.
Great job. Made us miss Louisville all the more.
Yeah, sure does.
I think most of the people are here. I'm going to go ahead and get our discussion kicked off now. My name is Kevin Traeger, and I'm a member of the Jewish Community Relations Council here in Louisville. I'm also a Louisville native, so that video was really, really cool to see and learn about some of the history that I didn't even know about. But I have seen the city change and grow so much over the past few decades. It means a lot to my family. I just had my first child earlier this year, and it's just I can't think of a better place to raise kids than Louisville. We are proud to have hosted this presentation today of our beloved city. And I would especially like to thank Robert and Lisa Klein, our Louisville Partnership co-chairs, for all of their wonderful work on the video and for their time leading our local partnership efforts. Just a little bit of background on the partnership. It is a platform for promoting people-to-people relationships through cultural, social, educational, and community-based programs. Our partnership family is made up of 16 Jewish communities in the United States, as well as 2 Israeli municipalities, Akko and Mate Asher, at the Western Galilee region in Israel and Budapest, Hungary. Now, the partnership is part of the Jewish Agency Partnership Unit. There are 46 partnerships that engage and connect more than 350,000 Jewish people around the world. Louisville was actually one of the founding communities in the partnership, and this has been around for over 20 years now. We have had countless delegations from Western Galilee and Budapest visit us here, and we have sent many community leaders and professionals overseas. The partnership mission is to promote mutually beneficial endeavors between the people of Central Area Consortium, the Western Galilee, and Budapest, forging relationships through shared responsibility, knowledge, embracing our diversity, harnessing innovation, and reinforcing our continuity through programs that build Jewish identity and strengthen our communities while forming global connections among and between Israel, the United States, and Budapest. So Louisville is a very special place. We have had a lot of social unrest this year as we deal with racial issues. And while those issues exist all over the United States, they are especially galvanized here in Louisville because of what happened to Breonna Taylor, a young African-American woman who was killed by police in her own home earlier this year. So I would like to go ahead and introduce Kendall Boyd. He is the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Louisville. He is a recent visitor to our partnership region in Israel, and he's going to talk a little bit about our city more, as well as his experience briefly in the Western Galilee. So Kendall, take it away.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Well, first, one love, Israel. How's everybody doing? So good to see everybody. PSA, wear your mask. We're not out of this COVID yet, so please protect yourselves, protect your family. So I wouldn't be a government official if I didn't say this. So there's that. So first off, let me say, awesome video. I am a native Louisvillian myself. I was born in Louisville, even though I grew up across the bridge in Indiana. A lot of what you saw in that video is home for me. You know, Muhammad Ali, the champ, one of my idols, both in adulthood and as a child. Been to the Slugger Museum numerous times. My dad and I are texting back and forth every day because the World Series is going right now. So this was very personal for me. So thank you for that video. That was awesome. So as Kevin indicated, we're having some trouble here in Louisville right now. About late May, early June, we had basically rioting and looting, civil unrest in wake of the Breonna Taylor killing by Metro LMPD. And so it really brought forth issues around race and class here in our city, which they've been there for a while. They just really weren't acknowledged. They weren't really discussed. I mean, Matt and I have had discussions about things like anti-Semitism and racism here in Louisville, but we didn't think it would explode in the way that it did with violent outrage, is what we saw. We continue to have protests here in Louisville Metro. They're not violent, but they continue to be loud. They continue to scream for justice for Breonna Taylor. And again, I think what it does is it highlights some of the issues that we've been skirting for a while. So with that being said, part of my job as Chief Equity Officer is to try to bring communities and ideas together to have these tough conversations around things like racism, around things like bigotry and bias and hate. And how can we eliminate violence from our community and have a constructive dialogue to lift each other up and not tear each other down? Because if we tear up our community, then where are we going to go? I mean, after the smoke is cleared, after the glass is cleaned up, after the boards are taken down off of the windows, this is still our home. This is where we need to live. We need to thrive together, and we need to fight this COVID together. So this is very important work. A lot of the lessons that I learned when I went to Israel back in February, I'm applying them to my work today. That Israel trip back in February changed my life for the good. I was able to meet people from all walks of life, all walks of faith, and we come together to discuss these issues. And there wasn't yelling and going back and forth. It was, here's my perspective. Here's this person's perspective. Now, what can we do to make it better? You know, we went out into the northern country and, you know, we looked at the borders of like Lebanon, and we were having discussions about the missiles and the bombs that are sent over to Israel. We went to the hospital to talk to the Arabic doctor who happens to be Christian, but in his heart, he knew that he had to help people. That's what it was all about, helping people. And so every day when I turn on the news and I hear about, you know, things happening in Israel, or I hear about things happening here in our country, I mean, we're on the eve of a huge election here in the United States that's going to basically determine the next decade or two of how we live with one another, how we interact with one another. Are we going to get rid of this huge generational, racial, gender divide, or are we going to come together and make the United States the best America that it could be? So there's a lot of things that are going on right now. Again, with respect to Louisville, I'm part of a consortium called B3T, which is Build Back Better Together. We're broken up into various different silos like health and safety, economics, art and culture, bourbonism. Can't come to Kentucky and not talk about bourbon, right? So those various different areas like that. And we're looking to put together some policies and action plans that are going to lift Louisville Metro government post-pandemic and post-racial protests. So that's a little bit about what's going on with me. Again, I'm so happy to see everybody on here. These sort of things just sort of give me life and remind me why it's important that I do the work that I do. Again, going in to see the various faiths over in Israel and seeing people that look like me and people that don't look like me, but yet and still we hug and love one another. That's a beautiful thing. Having dinner with my cohorts and talking about their life and realizing their life's not much different than mine, and my life is not much different than theirs. And you know what? We can come together and love one another and be united, whether it's through faith, through love of food, through love of fun, through love of each other. Doesn't matter, because to me, that love right there is what's going to stop what was referred to as the ring of fire that currently surrounds Israel. That ring of fire that we see here in the United States, that's a powder keg that's waiting to explode in racism. And again, all of these things that we're seeing, people carrying guns in the street, confronting each other over simple things like wearing a mask because people are sick. I mean, come on, we as people are better than that. Not just United States citizens, not just Israeli citizens. I'm talking about people in general. There's no need to fight each other over wearing masks. We need to protect one another. We need to take care of one another. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Again, I enjoyed my trip in Israel. I learned a lot about the history of various different faiths. I saw how important faith is to a lot of individuals. This partnership really exposed or opened my eyes to the importance of these transcontinental partnerships. It can't be one without the other. We can bounce a lot of great ideas from one another, and we can learn from one another and be the best people that we can be. So like I always say, one love, Israel. Thank you all so much for what you do. I can't wait to visit one day. I see my friend Heidi up there. Hey, Heidi. And so again, thank you all for this opportunity to talk with you all, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the state of Louisville right now. God bless you, and one love, Louisville.
If I can jump in just real quick, if anyone has any questions for Kendall or for Kevin or for Robert and Lisa, you can certainly put it in the chat. I'd like to start with a question for Robert and Lisa. Robert and Lisa, in your creation of this video, is there a fact, is there something that you learned about Louisville that you didn't know that you found really interesting?
Well, I mean, I'm a lifelong Louisvillian, so I knew most of that stuff. It was good to refresh my memory and get the dates right and the places right. But I sort of knew most of that here and there. Rabbi Report gave me a lot of information I did not know, as far as some of the Jewish history of Louisville. And like, for example, information about Bernheim. I did not know a lot of that. What about you?
Well, I am not a native Louisvillian, but I feel like Louisville is now my home. And I learned some of that when I first came here, just learning about my new home. But there's not one particular thing that sticks out, but I know that Robert put a lot of time and effort into that video. And although I did a few of the voiceovers, he did the bulk of the work. So thank you, dear.
Oh, shucks.
Robert, it was excellent. I learned about Louisville, and I've lived here 10 years, so thank you.
And Matt, speaking from a equity perspective, that video, you know, mentioned George Rogers Clark. One of the statues of one of the people that escorted him was York. He's African American, was a former slave, and then was freed, and then he continued to stick.
I don't think I recognize any of these people. Do you?
No.
George Rogers Clark. So, you know, again, when we talk about equity and race, you know, African American history is American history, and it's Louisville history and Kentucky history. So, again, thank you, Robert, for that. That was awesome.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Kendall, we have a question for you. You said you learned a lot in Israel, and you mentioned some of the highlights. What are some of the other highlights of what you learned in Israel and some of the things that you saw in Israel?
Really like the camaraderie of the people, the importance of how the Israeli population has to stick together to ward off danger. That's the first time I've seen soldiers walking up and down the street with, you know, automatic weapons on their shoulders. When you're not used to that, that can be a little bit disconcerting, but then I understand why. It's for their protection, for the protection of the country, and for things like that. Just the conversations that I had with various individuals that live in Israel, especially the northern country, which is where we spent most of our time. When we went to the community center that one night, Matt, that was the Arabic community center, and we had dinner with the individuals, and I talked to Ahmed. And one of the quotes he gave me was, even though I'm Arabic, I'm still from Israel. I'm Israeli. That's what I am. Even if I practice the Muslim faith and so forth, I am still Israel. And that resonated with me because even though I'm Kindle first, with roots from Africa, I'm African American. I am American, and people can't deny you who you are. So
I was interested in.
That's just kind of what resonated with me. That's a little bit what I learned in Israel.
Kendall, we got another question from Robert. What is being done now to get folks to come back down to downtown in Nulu? And talk a little bit about the segregation in the West End of Louisville.
Sure. We're still in COVID, so I wouldn't just have a big sign saying everybody come out and go eat and go to the bars and do things like that. We've got to be careful because we're still in a pandemic. Downtown is not dangerous. Downtown was never dangerous. What we saw on TV with the looting and the riots and everything like that, that was a 2 or 3 night event that was sparked by people that don't live in Louisville. Local Louisville Black Lives Matter had nothing to do with these riots and everything. These were outside agitators who were trying to make a name for themselves and tear up our community and then left. They didn't participate in the cleanup. They didn't participate in the aftermath. They didn't participate in doing anything to make Louisville better. So I would encourage anyone who lives in Louisville right now, if you want to go downtown, go downtown. It's not dangerous. There's still businesses that are open that need, your dollars to keep from boarding up their businesses for good. We would just ask people to exercise caution, wear your mask, and engage in social distancing. And it's still your same hometown. It's still Louisville. It's just we have to look at it through the lens of COVID-19 right now. So it's not dangerous. Come on down. I'm here in my office right now, and I'm not scared of anything. So matter of fact, Matt, remember the last time we were on a Zoom was the day the Breonna Taylor decision was announced by the AG's office. And they had everybody ushering everybody out, hurry up and get out because the riots are going to start. Nothing happened. So that's that part. With respect to segregation in Louisville, one of the things that you'll learn about Louisville is Louisville has what they call polite racism. Louisville was built on polite racism. In the video, we saw like the Falls of the Ohio, and they talked about sending products downstream to the Mississippi River and so forth and so forth. Prior to the Civil War, Louisville was a major hub for the slave trade. Abraham Lincoln changed his mind about slavery while writing a speech here in Louisville. He saw the moral issues and ethical issues around slavery, and that changed his mind. So prior to the Civil War, this was a major hub for what we know as American slavery, which then transformed into Jim Crow and redlining and so forth. So in Louisville, we have what they call the 9th Street divide. If you go west of 9th Street, that is predominantly African-American community, a lot of poverty, a lot of what we see on TV with drugs and violence and things like that. On the same token, there's a lot of history west of 9th Street. Muhammad Ali is from west of 9th Street. There was a lot of industry in West Louisville prior after World War II, and a lot of those houses that were built still remain, and they're still beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful homes, and there's a lot of great people that live in West Louisville. One of the most beautiful parks in Louisville, Shawnee Park, is in West Louisville. So even though we have a history of segregation, part of the work that I do is to break down that 9th Street divide. There's no reason that no one in Louisville should be afraid to go west of 9th Street. Are there issues that we need to deal with? Absolutely. But there's issues in every community. And as long as we work together to address these in a substantive, meaningful way, we can make one Louisville, not West Louisville, East Louisville, South Louisville, just one Louisville.
That's a terrific answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to just share a brief story that has come to mind during this discussion, kind of on a different subject, but I mentioned in my remarks that, this city means a lot to my family. My grandmother was born here 87 years ago. And one of my favorite things, so my wife and I bought a house and moved into a neighborhood very close to where she grew up on Douglas Boulevard. So one of my favorite things to do, which I didn't even know she grew up that close to where I live. But basically, one of our oldest synagogues in town, Ad Yeshurun, was a lot of the Jewish people in Louisville back in the 1930s and 40s lived within walking distance of that synagogue, and including my grandmother, you know, when she was born 87 years ago. So I love driving, and the synagogue is on Douglas Boulevard, and there's homes and multifamily apartment buildings all around it. And I love driving down that street with her, and she can point out where every Jewish family lived in the 1930s. And she points out the apartment, you know, the 2-story multifamily building that she grew up in. And it's literally like less than a mile from my house. So it's really cool to see that. I mean, most of the Jewish families have moved like out towards the suburbs, but it's just crazy to try to think about what Jewish Louisville was like, you know, almost 90 years ago, how all these families were living on the same couple of streets, and they were walking to the synagogue. And now it's kind of come full circle because, I mean, I could walk there if I wanted to.
That was true well into the 1960s, actually, yes.
That's really neat. Sharon?
Yes, I just want to say thank you. First of all, nice to see you, Kendall. So nice to see you. And thank you to Lisa and Robert. I was supposed to stay with you back in February, and because of it was just the beginning of COVID-19, we canceled, really. But it's so nice to see you and see the town. And I'm really hoping that soon we'll be able to come, you know, physically, face to face. And
we'll look forward to when we can host you for real.
Yeah. So thank you. Just wanted to say thank you. It was fascinating.
You're very welcome.
God willing, very soon. At this point, I think I'd like to turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, you...
I'm here, so I think it's my job to wrap it up and say Toda Rabah to everyone. So Robert and Lisa, thank you so much. Kevin, thank you. Kendall, you summed it up so well, not only about Louisville, but over the 20 plus years that we've been part of Partnership. And when I remember being here when Partnership started, and Bracha was working with Lior Yaron, who was the first chair of the consortium from America, our Lior. So we've been involved for a long time. But Kendall, when you said earlier, going to Israel changed my life, that is what I've heard over and over and over again for 20 plus years. And whether it's Robert who went on the Artist in Residence program, or the women who visited with JWRP, or the Israelis who have been able to spend time here in Louisville, many of you, I see you on the screen. That's what the partnership's all about, are these personal conversations, Kendall, that you were talking about when you spent time in the Western Galilee. And so again, we can't wait to have our Israeli friends back in the Ville, as now I can't call it anything but the Ville, back here in Louisville with us. And we can't wait to be with you. And Kevin, I can't wait to take you and your family now, because you summed up Louisville so well. The next generation has arrived. So you're next on the big plane when it's time to go. So again, thank you, Bracha. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Michelle, Efrat, everybody. I hope I didn't miss anyone. Shalom, shalom, Lila Tov to you, and a happy Tuesday for everybody here for the rest of the day. Thanks for spending some time with us. Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Bye, everybody. Good to see everybody.
Stay safe, stay healthy, everybody.